This hour of broadcasting brought to you by TwoWayRadioCenter.com, a Motorola value-added reseller. Welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. Brought to you by Vigilant Impact. The Church Safety Guys is a nonprofit organization dedicated to equipping the vigilant, those men and women who stand watch, keeping our houses of worship and places of faith safe. We believe church safety and security must be a ministry first and have engaged, servant leaders who continually strive for excellence and teams of motivated volunteers that are always training. Join us for the next hour as the Church Safety Guys unpack safety, security, leadership, and ministry operations with your hosts, Dr. James McGarvey and Mike Scully. This broadcast is also available on YouTube, your favorite podcast platforms, churchsafetyguys.com, and on the original Church Security app. Download it today. Feel free to like, subscribe, and share with your ministry.
Well, hello. Welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. I am James, and once again on this broadcast, joined by my co-host, Mike.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Not bad. I feel like it's been a little while, but at the same point, we've caught up more in person this year than ever. So it's
sure.
Really weird.
It is. We've had a lot this fall. I think we've had a lot going on. So last week we took off because I was up in New England doing the workshop, and that was great. We had quite a few. I think we had about 12 churches that were represented from
great.
all over Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Vermont, which was great. And some really good discussions. So there was a lot, there were a lot of questions that the churches had that were very good about starting a safety team and handling different aspects of that and concerns. So it was fun to be home, and I got a chance to see some family too, which is always
Good.
Usually a good thing.
Well, and I mean, I think that's 5-6 states this year that we've at least had some sort of event going on in, or some conference or seminar or speaking engagement. So God continues to amaze me in the ways that he blesses this ministry and the reach. And certainly thank you to all of you out there listening and watching that make this possible, whether that's supporting us in our Patreon or other ways through sponsorship or even purchasing our resources. So thank you for helping us do what we do.
For sure. And it was an interesting experience for my wife and I, because we visited, I told you, but just sharing with some of the folks, we visited 2 colleges, one in the Hudson Valley in New York, and then also one actually in Manchester on the coast of New Hampshire. And it was I think it was the first time that I've ever had the official parent college road trip thing. And so I walked, it was crazy because the second one, I'll mention that real quick. The second one was Southern New Hampshire University. And so we're walking through the campus, and they have a gorgeous campus. And of course, we had a tour, and the gal that was doing it did a fantastic job. And so we're walking from building to building, and I keep noticing this mascot of the school, right? Because the school's, I think, in the NCAA, and they do a bunch of different things, but I keep seeing this mascot, and of course it's red, white, and blue. And it looks like, basically it looks like a Patriot-esque mascot.
Yep.
And so I'm like, what in the world? I'm like, y'all are going to get in trouble for, for copying the Patriots. And, at one point, the gal that was giving us the tour stopped and she said, like, we walked into the gym and she said, I'm going to tell you, I'm sure you've noticed that, our mascot, our school mascot looks like, another mascot that's popular in New England. And I was like, yeah, why is that? And she said, well, the guy that actually designed the logo for the Patriots actually designed their logo
Oh,
for the college back in the day. And
no
it was
kidding.
supposed to be like I think it's the penman, like Patriot penman.
Okay.
So I'm like, that's pretty close, but somehow they've
Uncanny, yeah.
managed to not have any copyright laws or infringement or anything like that.
I
So,
tell you, when you started telling the story about going around on tour of a college, the last thing I thought you were going to talk about was copyright infringement. I thought you were going to talk about how you were eyeballing their cameras and smoke detectors and wondering what's wrong with their buildings.
well, that's a given, right? I mean, I was walking around, and of course, you always assess. Well, maybe you don't always assess.
Yeah.
I assess that. Like, I'm like, okay, where's the security office?
Yep.
What's your preventative measures? And of course, down in the Hudson Valley, that's a little bit different.
A lot
That
different.
that school, that college was actually the CIA. So it was not CIA like government CIA,
Yep.
but actually food prep, because my middle daughter is interested in being a chef. So she was checking out this college, and um, it's a pretty
Yeah.
ritzy
Ritzy area.
college. And so we're walking through, and that was my question. I'm like, so do you guys have like any law enforcement around? Because parts of the neighborhood wasn't great. So that was me being
Yep.
me being a dad. And but that was fun. It was interesting, certainly interesting getting to see a couple of new places. And I think we were all kind of cautiously optimistic um, about them. But the
Sure.
folks at both places did a great job of kind of showing us around. So
Well, I'm
at this
jealous you
point,
got to go back through my old stomping grounds in New England there. Haven't been back in a few years. Couldn't make this trip, but hopefully get up there sometime soon.
well, and I didn't think about it. I didn't think honestly at all about what time of the year it was. And, of course it was last weekend, and it was peak for the trees and everything. And I hadn't back up there in October in a long time, probably 10, I think 10 or 12 years. And so I was driving through, and I'm like, everything was just popping. The colors were gorgeous. And I'm like, this is just amazing. It's great to see God's handiwork. And then I, get in the car and drive back to Ohio, and I'm like, I'm like looking around, and trees haven't turned yet. And, it's a crazy thing. But yeah, there were a lot of folks up there. So looking around, but
I believe it.
good stuff.
Well, I already had a friend bring me my contraband, i.e., Vermont maple syrup. So
There you
I was
go.
good there. I didn't have to have you send me some. So it's good.
Yeah, I actually at one point in time I asked my parents. I was like, "Okay, where's the good syrup places around here? I need to stock up on it." So they were
What I should have done is have you overnight me some cider donuts because they don't know what cider donuts down here actually are.
Honestly, I didn't even, believe it or not, I didn't even get to try some this year. So that's a fail on probably on my side, but yeah, it is what it is. So anyhow, but if this is the first time you've joined us, or you haven't joined us for a while, welcome. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. As always, you can visit our website at churchsafetyguys.com, and there's some great resources on there for you and your church. And like Mike said, we're very appreciative of all the support and our sponsors, because we certainly couldn't do what we do without you guys. So thank you very much for supporting our ministry, and we're we're quickly coming to the end of the year. I think we're almost to our 150th episode here. And so we're hoping that I think the end of November and December, we've got some churches lined up that we're going to be working with and that sort of thing. So I think we're kind of hoping to take a Christmas break on the broadcast and come back in January. But we've got the next couple of weeks lined up with some great folks that are experts in their areas, and so hopefully that'll be beneficial to you all as they come on. So on this broadcast, we want to talk about child safety and prevention. I know a lot of times that will pop up, and for us, it's always been an important aspect for church safety. And our pastor, when we started our safety team, our pastor initially said, "You know what? I don't care if you only have one person that shows up for Sunday service to volunteer. I want somebody with the kids, and I want to protect them and keep them safe." And so it's an important topic, but at the same time, there's also a lot that we can do to prevent bad things from happening before they happen. And also want to address on this broadcast a little bit of how to handle things when they do go sideways and wrong, and how we can kind of navigate those waters. So with that, I will bring our guest in on the broadcast, and that would be Theresa Lynn Sidebotham. So thank you, Theresa, for joining us, and welcome to the broadcast.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
For sure. So for those that don't know, you have an amazing family story. So I'm gonna throw you and your husband out there, because I love how you guys met, and certainly your two careers are pretty unique. So if you would share your story with us, that would be great.
Yeah, so I was actually a missionary kid growing up in Indonesia, and my husband and I met at Wheaton College. I was a lit major, he was a geology major. He was also Army ROTC. And since I was a poor missionary kid and he liked adventure, our meaningful meeting was when we were gleaning food that had been thrown away behind the grocery stores in the Chicago winters. So we got married. He did his active duty. First son was born in Panama, second son Fort Belvoir, third son in California, on the way to Indonesia, fourth son in Indonesia, where we were missionaries there for a time. And then we came back to the States because our kids had some special needs, and were vulnerable in some ways. And what do you know? I ended up going to law school, and now I work a lot with churches, ministries, a lot with child safety. The boys are all grown up. 3 of them are married, so I have 3 beautiful daughters-in-law, 4 granddaughters, and a brand new grandson. So I am completely passionate about child safety.
Awesome. And that's honestly, you are so busy between your family life and also your law firm, that I'm sure you try and get together with them as soon as, or every chance you can, rather.
Absolutely.
For sure. So with the topic, we'll just jump right in. So with the topic of child safety, and we were talking earlier a little bit about preventative measures. What are some of your thoughts? And I know it's kind of a wide spectrum, but you work with churches and you help churches. So what are some of your thoughts on that, from what you see, like in the culture today? Like, what do you see churches doing or not doing in a positive way for that?
There's an amazing number of churches that really are doing it right. They have great programs, great concern around child safety. It's not quite as universal as we hope. And one brand new organization the Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention.
Mhm.
I had the honor of serving on their expert panel, but they've actually put together standards that if you go to their website, Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention, you can get to the standards. You can see, are you one of
Mhm.
those ministries that's getting it right? Are you a ministry that maybe needs to do a little bit more work on it? And there's some reasons it's really important to do that work.
Sure. For sure. And it's interesting because sometimes like we'll talk to churches often and it still seems like churches might overlook details of providing child safety. And we've kind of partnered a little bit with ECAP and trying to help churches with that accreditation that actually Jeff has been working on. And so we've kind of worked on it with him too, to say, okay, let's get the word out that, here's a great standard and great way. If, maybe if the church doesn't know anything or doesn't have an extensive knowledge of how to navigate safety and that sort of thing, they can use them as a resource. So it's definitely, Jeff has done a great job with that. And I know several churches, actually including my own, that have reached out to him and definitely been blessed by his work in that area.
I feel like there's a lot of churches that either fall into the trap of I'm too small, it'll never happen here. We know everybody, and everybody knows us, and there's no way it could happen. And we don't know anybody that it's happened to, so therefore it couldn't happen here. And I feel it's a trap. It's a mental mind game that they talk themselves into, and they keep themselves there. And whether I get it, if you're in a situation where you're tight on resources, tight on volunteers, that's real. Okay, I'm not lessening that at all. But the reality is that what we do with and for our children is the most important thing we can do in that church. Okay, now yes, the worship matters. Yes, the speaking matters, and all of that comes into play. But we want to make sure that not only are the members safe, but the least of these, the kids that have the most to lose and really the most life ahead of them, we want to make sure we protect their innocence right from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Because unfortunately, there is a lot of child abuse out there. I mean, as many as 1 in 10 American males may be a sexual abuser of one type or another. About 1 in 7 girls and 1 in 25 boys get abused before they turn 18, and 3/4 of that is in the circle of trust and people they know. So maybe it wouldn't happen in the church, but maybe people at church need to recognize that it's happening in the school or the family. But to be a witness to the community, the church has to be what researchers have called the capable guardian. And this was mentioned in one of the John Jay studies for the Catholic Church. But the idea here is that to have child abuse happen, you've got to have 3 things. You've got to have a child who's vulnerable in some way, and that could be for a lot of reasons. One could be children who have disabilities are a lot more vulnerable. You have to have somebody who's willing to be an offender against a child, and you really hope that person's not in your church, but you can't guarantee it. And then the last thing you've got to have is a negligent environment where it could happen. So if you get a church where everyone sees themselves as a capable guardian and everyone is trained and watching and ready to care for children, it's not going to happen, even if you got a vulnerable child or a would-be offender. And that's the exciting thing about taking these precautions, is they really do work.
Right.
For sure. And that's one of the things that we've harped on, Mike and I, at several of the conferences that we've had, and also one-on-one with churches, that is the idea that, look, if you have a safety team, that's great. If you have folks that are taking care of kids, that's great. But everyone's responsibility is safety. they need to connect, they need to talk. But when you pull everybody together, that's a force multiplier. You have all of these resources instead of, 5 people in this ministry or 6 people in this ministry all of a sudden. And I'll tell you too, one of the biggest things, that we've seen statistically for church growth connects back to church safety and children's ministries. So, folks, younger generation folks that are coming in today that are looking for churches are looking for churches because of the kids ministry. Like, how are you providing for ministry for my kids? But the other thing is, how are you protecting those kids? And honestly, I can't tell you how many times, when we first started going to our church, one of the reasons we did was because they had an Awana program, and that drew us in because we thought, okay, whatever church has an Awana program also values kids and puts kids, importance up there and safety up there. But what's interesting to me is, all the time we have folks visiting our church and they check out the kids program and they want to know, like, they'll ask me to come up as this former safety director, and they'll say, can you explain to me what your processes are for this, and making sure, because they want to feel comfortable knowing that, we are thinking about the bad stuff, even though we don't want it to happen, obviously, but they want to know that we have a plan and a process to respond to address that. And I think sometimes when we reach out and there's continuity between the ministries and the teams to support that and ultimately support the mission of the church, then we're developing that atmosphere where, like you mentioned, it makes it so much more challenging. And I've had, in fact, actually not too long ago, I was at a conference where I actually had something as simple and basic as background checks. I had a church say, no, we don't do that because we know everyone. And, and I was like, okay, then let's talk about this a little. And one of the illustrations that I love to give, because of the shock value, is that, for those of you that are into true crime and that sort of thing, Dennis Rader, a very infamous serial killer in Oklahoma, or I think it was Kansas, actually was part of his church. And for 30 years, as weird as that is, was in the church, was serving in leadership, and, committed heinous crimes and acts, and nobody stopped him. Nobody saw any red flags. Nobody saw anything. And I've used that as an example before, just to say, look, background check is just a basic preventative thing. Will it always find everything? No, it won't. But again, it gives us a starting place to say, is this the right person to be in this ministry?
Well, it comes back to, I think, Theresa, you covered it. You said specifically a negligent environment. Well, not doing background checks contributes to that negligent environment where, somebody who's willing to be that offender may be less likely to even try in a church that publishes that they do rigorous background checks. They're going to look for the church that doesn't, and they're going to go after that one first.
And that's just the beginning of what you can do for child safety, because the background checks will only find people who've got a criminal conviction, and that's
Right.
not everyone. So that's
Sure.
that's a good basic minimum. But having applications where you ask people questions that are pertinent and kind of nosy, having waiting periods for volunteers, having interviews where you really talk to them, and then really good reference checks where you do in-depth follow-up to see, what are they like around kids? Would you have any hesitation at all in leaving your child with this person? And then the training of people. So, background checks is a good point to start, but then there's a whole lot that we want to be doing.
Well, and it's interesting too, because oftentimes, Mike and I will use each other as a reference for different things. And not too long ago, I got a phone call Mike because he was actually helping with a kids ministry program that his son was involved in. And I thought that is the first time some of the questions that they asked me were the exact things that you just mentioned, Theresa. And I was like, that's the first time that I've actually been asked that. And one of the questions they asked was, would I be comfortable leaving my own kids with Mike? And I had to stop it. No, I'm joking. I didn't have to stop and think about it. But, from a ministry standpoint, it really kind of blew me away. And I'm like, that's the type of question. Absolutely. That's the type of question that you should be asking. And so many times, like Mike said earlier, so many times churches may be short staffed on volunteers or whatnot. So they're trying to push forward. Hey, let's get this person trained. Let's get them in there. They're fine. There's nothing wrong with them, because they don't want to be the bad guy. But at the same time, things happen when we don't have processes and ways to go through some of that, and just be cautious. And, again, sitting down with a person, doing a simple reference check, background check, interview, because again, that's, our kids should be our most valuable asset in,
Yep.
In church and in church ministry. And so we want to make sure that we're not not, okay, this person would be good. We want to be solid in saying, you know what, this is definitely the right person for this ministry. And, their life is reflective of biblical principles. And, we're going to be blessed by having them in here, and not necessarily not blessed by rushing or moving forward with some of that.
And for those of you who may be wondering, how do I even start by writing these processes or getting policies in place? In addition to ECAP, Brotherhood Mutual has got a terrific online repository with all kinds of sample policies and recommended procedures, and that's free to go and look at.
Sure.
If you don't work with them as an insurance company, although they are a great insurance company.
They are. We've actually, I think we've had, well, I've worked with 2 churches over the last 20 years that we've used them and been very fantastic. They've just been fantastic, a resource for us. And I think we're actually going to have our rep with them on in a couple of weeks here too. So that'll be a great, and that actually winds up our month discussion of this topic. So yeah, that's a great resource to point to as well, for sure. Mike, were you going to jump in there and say something?
Yeah, I was actually going to say I got a gold nugget, because everything we've been talking about thus far on screening and making sure and checking and doing the extra due diligence, it's not just for your kids ministry. You can use it for your safety team too, and frankly should be. Anybody that's going to have access to kids, not just the ones who are going to care for them, but certainly also people in a position of authority, like a safety team member that may or may not have direct authority and or a badge or other sorts of, that puts them in a position where they could potentially prey on somebody who's vulnerable. And as a result, you want to make sure that those folks who are more likely to engage with those kids are above reproach.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot to be said. And we've covered this in the past, the discussion of having your doors open and allowing folks to come in. Obviously, we're a church. We want to minister to everyone, but at the same time, setting up certain parameters and certain stop measures to say, you know what, in this particular situation, I'm glad that you're looking for a church. I'm glad that God brought you here. I believe that God saved you, but guess what? We're going to make sure that because of your background and your history, that we don't put you in a place where you're tempted to do something that you previously might have done. So we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to make sure that, that you don't go in this ministry or near the kids, or you don't do this or that. And I think from a church perspective, safety team included, I think that's a delicate balance. And I think we've, in my church, I think we've managed to navigate that pretty well. Over the years, we've had a few folks that, we definitely had to counsel and sit with and say, okay, guess what? You know what? We love the fact that you're coming, but you're not allowed in this part of the church. You need to stay here, over here serving, and not near kids. And if you are near kids or you go near kids, then you're done. We will ask you to leave the church. And if we need to trespass and follow the legal ramifications of that. But I think that overall, I think you're spot on that by looking at from a safety perspective, for those of you that might have a smaller church where maybe you multitask or have folks that multitask in different ministries, I think that a lot of times we tend to forget that we need to evaluate and look at our safety folks just as well, because those folks can be placed in compromising situations if guards aren't already in place or policies and procedures aren't in place to make sure that that is covered. So I'll throw it over to you, Mike, because I know you want to add something.
Well, you brought up a good point about doors. And I mean, I want to reference a recent safety and security inspection that we did on a school. And we saw a whole bunch of classroom doors left open. And from a safety perspective, it's a double-edged sword. In one way, it's less safe. In another way, from a transparency and an openness and a reducing that opportunity for an environment where something bad could happen, it actually is those chances. So it was both a pro and a con at the same time. Is you're mitigating in one factor, but you're opening up risk in yet another. So it's a delicate balance. It's not easy. So maintaining safety and security, you have to have multiple considerations. And especially when kids are involved, you may have to make a decision that's tough to keep the kids safe.
For sure. So I want to shift gears a little bit with the time that we have left, and kind of go down more of the path of, oh no, what do we do when this happens? And Theresa, you mentioned that before the broadcast, but what are some things, and what are your thoughts on that? And what is the church's overall? I'll start with that. What is the church's overall responsibility legally in this area of prevention? And then let's go down the path of, okay, maybe something happened. How do we mitigate that situation and make that situation or address it? I don't know if we can make it better, but just addressing it.
Yeah, so the legal standard for what a church needs to do is it needs to act reasonably, because if you're acting reasonably, you're not being negligent. And now that there are so many standards and policies and procedures out there, if a church isn't doing anything at all, it may be not acting reasonably. And so, could there be negligence? That's possible. Now, whether the church has been negligent or not, evil happens. Children are going to get abused. We're never going to take it down to zero. And so sometimes a church will be in the position where, now they have to respond. So if they hear about something, the responsibility shifts a little bit, because every state has got some kind of mandatory reporting law. In some states, everyone's a mandatory reporter. In most states, clergy will be mandatory reporters, except with very narrow exceptions for confessional type discussions. And in many states, people who work with children, teaching children, so forth, are mandatory reporters. So usually the first thing you're going to want to do when you get a report of child abuse is figure out quickly how to do your mandatory report. And if you fail to do that report, there can be actual criminal liability people in churches have been charged with crimes for not reporting or for not reporting quickly enough. So that's a super important first step. And then there's other issues to responding that we can talk about as well.
For sure. And I know, and I mentioned it earlier, but I know in Ohio, as I mentioned to you earlier before the broadcast, for a long time, there was an ignorance and just not understanding of that responsibility to report. And so I believe there was a court case, and real quick, the defense of the church, an incident happened. The church said, well, we didn't know that we had an obligation to report. And of course, the judge in the case was like, no, you should have known, because this is what the law says, and Ohio is a mandatory reporting state. And so it's interesting to me. And when I have the chance to talk to churches about church safety and that sort of thing, I will ask them, I'll say, do you guys have a way or a plan to respond to this when it happens? Do you know that the 800 number you're supposed to call with the state of Ohio? Do you know how this is supposed to work? And oftentimes I'll get the deer in the headlights, oh, are we responsible for that? How do we handle this? And so for us, how we have it set up is when something happens, when something is reported, it gets reported to either the children's director or myself. Previously, when I was a safety director, it would get reported to the children's director or the safety director, and then that individual would immediately go and grab one of the children's pastors and sit down with them, and together they would partner and investigate further and bring all the details in and evaluate stuff, and then make those phone calls and that information. I think honestly, and that's what I will throw out there, that a decision shouldn't be made by one person. And you should, if you're listening to this at a later time or even now, you shouldn't be the one person that's only handling this. So if you get a report, or if something is brought to your attention, you need to partner with someone else immediately and move forward with, okay, here's how we're going to do this, and not get caught in that, oh, it's not a big deal because, it's just that one, one situation.
Accountability, but also two heads are better than one. Truly, you need to make sure that you're helping each other out through that, because frankly, I mean, there's very few that have had the experience to having gone through this and have the bumps and bruises to learn what they did wrong and how to do it better next time. You hope there's never a next time. You hope there's never a first time. But so this is not something that most people certainly even think about very much or train for, to understand that when this happens, this is how we're going to respond. And if you're the primary, who's the secondary? It should be thought of with that 1 and 2,
sure.
not just I'm the pastor, or I'm the kids ministry lead, or I'm the safety director. No, it should involve multiple parties at that point. So immediately there's also not a tendency to have bias enter the picture to say, well, I know that kid, or I know that person, it couldn't happen. No, you want objectivity immediately involved on all of that processing.
And we've come to realize that, there's the basic child safety training, like we have one that's great for volunteers and teachers called Creating the Capable Guardian. And you can see that for free by going through ECAP's website. But we have a more detailed one for church leaders and people making decisions that helps unpack it all. And then I just recently wrote a book that's specifically about, how do you respond when there's been an allegation in ministry? And that could be anything from, child safety, sexual harassment, and so forth. Because there are so many ways that people can make mistakes. And so they do make mistakes, and that's not good.
For sure. What is the name of that book while we're on it?
Yeah. So the book, I'm kind of hold it up here. Um, Handling allegations in a ministry, responses and investigations. Um, and it's written by me, and that's kind of an unusual name, but if you look on Amazon, that should pop right up in either hard copy or Kindle. So it walks through the steps of, you get the allegation. If it's child safety, you're going to file that, that law enforcement child protective services report. But then, what are you going to do for, making sure that children are safe, that a person doesn't continue to have access to children, that the child's handled appropriately? And you said something earlier about, here's the bad thing, we can't make it better. But in a way we can, because what we're finding is if we have really quick intervention, especially with young children, and if they quickly get into an appropriate therapeutic response, they really do okay. The people who have this long-term trauma that goes on and on for decades are typically people who are not blessed to have good response, good treatment, good supportive community. So I'm actually very hopeful that when we respond well, we can heal, we can act redemptively and
Sure.
minister to the child.
For sure. What are some of your thoughts for responding in a positive way? Like what are some of your suggestions on best practices for responding once something's happened?
Well, so speaking specifically to child safety, if we have the allegation, we make the report, we need to figure out if other children have been harmed. Law enforcement, CPS won't necessarily do this. That might look like a very carefully crafted announcement to stakeholders and people who have a need to know. On the other hand, just because there's an accusation doesn't necessarily mean it's true. So in the meantime, we have to protect the person who's accused, from having their reputation destroyed when we don't know yet if it was true. And so we're going to move carefully. The child safety plan needs to make sure that no children are at further risk of being harmed. So typically the person who is accused will be asked to step out, not to be in children's ministry, maybe not to attend church for a season. But again, it's got to be handled carefully because the person who's accused needs due process. Anybody could be accused at any time of something that didn't even happen, for a lot of reasons. And so you're balancing these needs. You want to provide pastoral care to someone who may be a victim and their family. You need to provide pastoral care to a person who's been accused and their family. You need to make sure that neither of these pastoral care people are also decision makers. You definitely don't want anyone who's accused to have influence on the decision makers or being able to control any kind of investigative response. You don't want to mess with the law enforcement investigation, but on the other hand, you may need more information for your own disciplinary purposes. So, timing and how you ask questions and what you do when, it's all pretty tricky. And as a law firm, we spend, a fair amount of our time advising on these kinds of situations.
For sure. So would you say, like, the thought kind of popped into my head, oftentimes it would be, I guess, beneficial to have a team of people that would be able to respond to this type of thing from the church? Like, would that make sense to maybe have a list generally of folks, like, if this were to happen, this is our response team? I mean,
that's super helpful, especially in a big church where you're certainly going to have things to respond to it at some level sooner or later. Maybe not the worst levels, but things are going to come up. In smaller churches, what can be helpful is to have one or two trained people and then have a good handle on what community resources there are. So there's really good victim service organizations, for example. And so but even for a small church, you do need to know what needs to be done quickly and have some thought into, how would we keep kids safe if anything came up.
For sure.
I think right off the bat is we talked earlier a bit about that communication, that flow between safety and security, as well as children's ministry, and that has to happen immediately. When there's every season, I know it tends to follow sometimes like the school season, even though it's year round. Yet you're having a restart. There's an opportunity to have another conversation. Certainly, if there's ever a personnel change, a leadership change in staff, that's an opportunity to have that conversation. But I think the key is make sure that you're communicating, that they see you not as, hey, trying to step on their toes, but this is, hey, we want the same thing. Let's figure out how best we can work together if and when something happens. The best thing you can do, whether it's an emergency situation with fire or police, or whether it's a child safety situation or an allegation, is to have plans in place and strategies already ready on dealing with these types of things in advance, so that when and if they do happen, you're not scrambling. You're not building relationships during an emergency. You're falling back on the relationships that you've built.
Absolutely. That is so important.
I like the idea too, to go back to what you mentioned, Theresa, with the I guess the little piece that, you know what, just because an allegation is made, it might not necessarily be true. And I think a lot of times we've seen that, and I guess I don't know. I guess the only thing to emphasize with that is just be extremely gracious and understanding, and not necessarily, you don't have to necessarily agree with I don't know, if something bad happened, or if something did happen, agree with the offense, but keeping an open mind to make sure that once the investigation, or while the investigation is going on, that facts are presented. And it's interesting because every once in a while, we had an issue a few years ago with a couple at our church that they had a restraining order, or they were working on getting a restraining order. A husband and wife were splitting up, and they had kids and that sort of thing. And what was interesting to me is I sat down with them. They actually came to me and they sat down with me and they said, we have a safety concern because, we're afraid that the ex-spouse might come to the church and pick up the kids and not get permission, and this, that, and the other thing. And I asked them, I said, okay, I'm just going to ask you some very specific, very honest questions about this. Do you have a restraining order? Has he ever done anything that a judge has issued? In Ohio, it's a protection order, but, has a judge issued? And their response was, well, not yet, but but we need, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to stop you right there. Because I said, the thing is, until the judge actually comes with that piece of paper saying this is the issue, then, when that happens, you need to bring it to the church so we can address it accordingly and move from there. So my point in saying that is just that it was a very dramatic situation. And if I had taken it at the face level of what they were telling me right off the bat, then I would have said, oh yeah, absolutely, this person shouldn't be here, blah, blah, blah. But the reality was I was asking open questions and digging deep and saying, okay, wait a second, this is not meeting, my investigation of thinking through, this is how the law works and that sort of thing. And I know a little bit about protection orders in Ohio, but just because I've gone and I've studied it, because I was afraid that something like this would happen. So I wanted to know the law and be able to navigate it. And I think sometimes we see that when we're going back to the investigation piece of what was said, what wasn't said, and that sort of thing, the extra drama that comes into it, because it's emotional and because something was said, and we want to make sure that, and we get upset because, well, this shouldn't have happened on our watch and all of the emotion that's tied up in with that. So what are your thoughts on that, and just how do we deal with some of that?
Well, another place where it's easy for ministries to go wrong is if a child maybe brings something up or responds, if either the parents or someone in the ministry interrogates the child at length, you can really mess things up that way. Children
Sure.
can be, led into actually creating memories of stuff that never happened. It can be very bad for the child and for contaminating the memories. So we always tell people, just very minimal initial conversation, enough to get some basic facts, and then turn it over to the professionals who have trained child forensic interviewers. Now, sometimes law enforcement CPS will drop it. They won't make a finding. They won't do anything. And then the church or ministry is left with really tough decisions around child safety plans, around discipline, sometimes has to do its own investigation because of that. If you're in that position, doing an investigation is not a DIY project. You need people who really know what they're doing, and that might
Sure.
require bringing in outside expertise there. There's just so many ways to get it wrong. So being prepared, having the team that you were talking about, and people have some basic training in how to respond, having the right people on call to talk to, whether that's your you'll want to talk to your insurer, you may have counsel to talk to, and so forth. So you can get it right, but the important place to start is realizing you don't know what you don't know until you've been in
Sure.
it.
For sure. Mike, did you want to add anything in wrapping up?
Yeah, I think this is a really good conversation. I think we've covered a lot of different areas, and I love where you started, Teresa, with the 3 points. And really, that comes back to, as a safety director, if you think through the lens of those 3 that Teresa covered early on, is understanding that, saying, okay, we're not going to be able to handle every vulnerable situation that we have. We will be able to understand and identify children that may be more vulnerable than others, and understand and have that conversation. We may understand that there are potential previous known offenders that are attending our church, as James said, but for the vast majority, we're not going to be aware of that. So it comes back down to the third one of that negligent environment. That's where we operate. That is where the cameras, the right sorts of situations, the escort policies, the not having 2 adults with any one child, or one adult with another child, always having 2 or more. Not separating by age group, so that there's not an age disparity that's significant. It's also good to keep that. So there's a lot of things that we can do from a safety and security perspective directly tied to that third point.
And our training on TeliosTeaches.com, it's a subscription-based training for churches and ministries. There's a whole lengthy training on child protection, as well as, other issues that affect churches and ministries, sexual harassment, how to respond, and so forth. There are great trainings out there, but it's important for everyone to be involved in at least one of them.
For sure, because you can't know what you don't know. Like what you said earlier, that's definitely a great point. And we've used, in fact, we have a requirement for those that are serving at our church, or my church, that they have to go on to the ECAP website and actually go through your class that you designed for them. So that's that's kind of a shout out for Theresa and her organization, because they've done a fantastic job of kind of taking some of the question out of that, and some of the uncertainty with providing that information. But there's definitely some great resources out there, and we would certainly recommend Brotherhood Mutual as one, and ECAP as another. But I think the reality is that if you don't research it and know how to handle it now ahead of time before it happens, then, when it happens, or if it were to happen, then you're not going to be as well prepared. So you certainly, regardless of your church size, you certainly want to jump in and learn and try and be more prepared for that type of situation. So we'll go ahead and, for sake of time, wrap up. But Theresa, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And where is, I guess, if you could just let us know, like, where's a good way, or what's a good way, if I can speak, what's a good way to contact you through the internet?
So if you reach out to Telios Law, you can either see my email under the attorney bios, or the general email address is on the main page. So Telios Law to get to me, TeliosTeaches.com to get to the training, and the Handling Allegations book. Probably Amazon's the easiest way to get that one.
Sure. Awesome. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Love what you guys are doing.
Thanks.
I got a new book to add to my list, so
for sure. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Again, we posted in the comments that book and resource. So you're welcome to look that up, and also Theresa's website with Telios Law. Fantastic resource. And I had the opportunity, actually, I met Theresa and her husband in Kentucky a few months ago, and great ministry, great emphasis and heart to really help churches. So I would definitely recommend them, and recommend them for training and a resource. And they're definitely a lot of great resources there for you and your church to benefit from. So you definitely want to check them out if you're looking to address this topic. So other things going on real quick. Again, next week, we're actually going to be talking with Dwayne Harris from Full Armor Church, and Dwayne will be on, and we'll be talking about crisis response to youth and handling youth, youth ministry in the church. And Dwayne has done a fantastic job in Central Florida with helping law enforcement connect with churches and responding to youth concerns and different things like that. So you definitely don't want to miss that. And as always, you can reach out to us through our website at churchsafetyguys.com, or you can always reach out to us through the Church Security app, which is available on the Apple platform and Google Play Store, and that's free to download. And there's some great resources on there as well for you and your team. And that's provided thanks to our sponsors, and TwoWayRadioCenter.com and Motorola are a great sponsor, and we're grateful to them for their support. Past episodes, you can reach out through Patreon, and you can actually go through, and everything's categorized on that site. So if there's a particular topic you're looking for, you can jump in there and find that. And other than that, we have a new resource that's coming out soon in a couple of weeks, called the 4 Pillars of Church Safety and Security. Really excited about that. That's something Mike and I have put together.
That was rapid style. I think that was the divine inspiration, I think. I mean, granted, it started by a presentation we did at a conference, and had folks talking to us about saying, "Hey, I want that book." Well, it's not a book. So,
like, hey, that's great stuff. When can I get a copy? And I'm like, well,
let's start working on it.
So we're hoping that comes out with Amazon probably the I would say the first or second week in November, and definitely something that you want to look at for maybe for your safety team for Christmas. That's coming up. I saw somewhere today online that there's only 10 more Sundays until Christmas. So, and someone, I don't know who, started already playing Christmas music. So
who could that be?
Yeah.
No,
and then I got blamed for it.
Yeah, that's your fault. No, we started organizing the project and so forth. And as we're organizing Christmas stuff, it's of course, hey, throw on some Christmas music on the Amazon Alexa in the background, and it did feel a little bit early. I will say that, but at the same point, getting organized, knowing how fast those weeks will fly by, and it will be New Year's before we know it. Especially with 3 little ones running around, we really got to get a jump on it, get that organization ready so that when we do decide to put up the decorations in November, we'll have a good foundation.
I'm pretty sure that you guys already have it mapped out on a spreadsheet, on an Excel spreadsheet to say this is the day that this is going to happen. And okay, so maybe I'll accept some responsibility because I came across a really good new Christmas CD that's coming out, and I'm a sucker for some some good Christmas music. So, but anyhow, we'll let you go. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If we can do anything resource wise for your church or your ministry, please feel free to reach out, and we will talk to you next week. So take care. God bless. Have a great week.
This hour of broadcasting brought to you by TwoWayRadioCenter.com, a Motorola value-added reseller. Thank you for joining the Church Safety Guys broadcast, brought to you by Vigilant Impact. We hope that you found it informative, and we appreciate your feedback and interaction. Be sure to share our broadcast with your teams, join the discussion online, and connect with us on social media. For other great ministry resources, download the Church Security app or at our website at churchsafetyguys.com. Remember, keep a servant's heart, a mindset of ministry, and semper disciplina. Always be training. Have a blessed week.